Turns out our Thursday Jinx is alive and well.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch. And want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to the everydayers joining us, all the Locked On College Basketball Discord members as well. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers, you can bet $5, and if you win, you get $300 in bonus bets. Check it all out at FanDuel.com. Hey, look, we already have our Friday show up and ready, and we basically just did a big weekend preview, and as part of that, we did our regular Thursday Jinx that Andy and I do when we have to, on Thursdays when we have to record ahead of Thursday night's action. And we put our Thursday night Jinx on the Memphis Tigers heading to Temple. Little did we know that it didn't matter which of the three ranked teams we picked for the Thursday Jinx, they were all going to lose. Gonzaga, number 16 in the nation, falls 97-89 at Oregon State in overtime. Memphis, number 18 in the nation, falls at Temple 88-81, the lone regulation game out of these three. And then number 20, Michigan, falls at Minnesota in overtime 84-81 on a Dawson Garcia buzzer beater. Here to help me unpack all of this is our good buddy Leaf Tulane. And Leaf, what a crazy Thursday night it was. So often we think of these Thursday nights as being a little bit sleepy, but my man, it was not a good night to be road at an unranked opponent. Where do you want to start with this conversation?
Well, I think Gonzaga is the team that shocks me the most from where they were at the start of the season. Maybe not where they are now, but I just want to unpack some things considering the way Gonzaga started the season. They blew out Baylor, which Baylor I don't think is that great, but they started the season with this premise of, wow, they return a ton from a team that figured it out late in the season, made the Sweet 16, pushed Zach Edey and Purdue, and you play a team in Oregon State that loses all their stars. Bilodeau's at UCLA, Pope's at Texas, and it almost kind of was the weirdest way of saying realignment and NIL distribution of resources doesn't make teams terrible. Like, there's a way to find your way into being adequate. They found a new conference. They were booted out of the Pac-12. They couldn't find a new home, and they lose their best players. Well, Tinkle's got them still playing ball, and Gonzaga just isn't as good as we thought they were because defensively they lack an identity. Graham Ike offensively is their identity along with Nembhard, but defensively he's a liability. And I think Gonzaga is going to have to find a lineup that mixes and matches some of their better defensive players with some of their better offensive players, as opposed to the starting lineup that they've been rolling recently, because it's changed. And you don't typically see a Mark Few team this late in the season have to search for answers and novelty. But that's where I want to start, just because I thought Gonzaga was a national championship contender the first couple of weeks of the season. And I have concerns, like considerable ones, maybe not to the point where, they can't make their, I think it's 10th straight Sweet 16 this year, which would be unbelievable. But it is alarming how quickly the ship has lost course.
Yeah, Levi, I love you starting there because I feel that too. I was literally thinking, I was laying in bed watching this game last night. Our guy Andy Patton was in the building for it, and it was just crazy because I was having those same thoughts of like the way Gonzaga handled Baylor to start the season. It was like, oh shoot, I was already higher on the Bulldogs than most people, but I don't think I was high enough. And I think it turns out that I was too high in the end. And to this point, it's not fully working for Gonzaga in the way that maybe we thought it would. I think it's also a recognition of the fact that it's harder to win the West Coast running away when you've got two former Pac-12 schools in your league, even if, as you said, basically they all abandoned ship because they still wanted to play at the high major level of a bunch of their best players. And so it's really interesting for me. So this game, Leaf goes to overtime. And look, let's also say this is not a bad loss for Gonzaga. It's a quad one loss, although it does mean now that Gonzaga is 2-5 in quad one. You'd like to have a better quad one record. But they don't have any bad losses on their resume, nor either was this one. From a standpoint of the box score, I mean, you look at it and, Graham Ike eventually fouled out, but yeah, he was 26 points in this game, 13 boards, did a whole bunch of stuff. Nembhard had 10 assists, a double-double in that way with 13 points to go with it. But look, it's hard to go win on the road. I mean, we got Kings and Radage getting 20 and 29 points for Oregon State. It's crazy stuff. And I got to be honest, Leaf, I just did not see, honestly, really any of these games happening this way, but they did. And with Gonzaga, I think there's some real stuff that they're going to have to get figured out here to take this West Coast Conference and to really start working their way back. I mean, Gonzaga's 16th. I think they're going to start slipping out of the AP poll here.
I mean, they haven't beaten anyone of note in quite some time. In fact, they've lost in all of those games. Also, I mentioned that the lineup changes have been needed. So Ben Gregg inserts into the starting lineup, which is something that Andy Patton and I had discussed for Gonzaga, and I think he's a catalyst for their success last year. But it reminded me of a guy they're missing, and it was a guy that was overthought for a long time, and it was Anton Watson last year. But Anton Watson was so valuable defensively, does all these things. Well, they had these athletes. They brought in Caleb Battle. They brought in Ajayi, who's an 18-point-per-game scorer in that aforementioned WCC. Well, Ajayi played 14 minutes with 0 points yesterday. You look at their bench; they scored 9 points on a Gonzaga team, which is known for depth and known for having talent. 9 points in an overtime game. So I am concerned about that, and I also am concerned about their defensive identity from the backcourt because they have two diminutive guards starting. And I wonder if there's some changes. If anyone can make it, it's few, but I feel like that's worth mentioning. I also was right there with you about taking Gonzaga far. It was one of my only. I made 2 future picks before the season. Gonzaga was the one I was most happy about at plus 1,800. They win that first game. They moved up to 900. I was like, oh, man, glad I got it then. Looks like a steal. Well, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole right now.
Yeah.
I just think that this Gonzaga team has less room for error than we think because, yeah, they beat Baylor. Baylor's not as good as we thought. They beat Indiana, who is ranked, but Indiana's terrible. They lost to Kentucky, even though they were leading by 16. That turns out to be a fine loss, but it was near Gonzaga. That was in Seattle. They lost to UConn, even though they were right in that game. And then now they lost to Oregon State. So all the games, and along with the loss to West Virginia, all the games that they, as well as UCLA, if I overlooked that. Yeah. But all the games that they could have a statement win for, they do not.
Yeah.
And that's never been something we've said about Gonzaga. So I am concerned. Mark Few, I have a lot of faith in, but the team itself, I have tempered expectations for.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I feel like we made that statement last year before the game at Kentucky in February, where they were struggling to have marquee wins as well. I need to look back to see if they might have had one in before that, but I feel like they didn't really have any quad one stuff to their name before that point. Also, just of note in this game, it's wild that it took a Graham EK3 of all people to get this game to overtime. But then in overtime, Gonzaga had a 1-point lead in the first 90 seconds. It was if Oregon State had hit a 3, I think pretty much right out of the gate there, and then a couple free throws from Battle and EK gave Gonzaga that lead. But then Leaf in the final 3:15 of overtime, Oregon State outscored Gonzaga 11-2. And that is when you mess with fire and you get into overtime, you just don't know what's going to happen. And I think college basketball has one of the fairest overtimes of most things. Like college football overtimes, weird. NFL overtime, it kind of sucks. So basketball overtime, I think, is fair for both teams, but it's also a flip of the coin because it's such a short sample size of how you determine the game. And Gonzaga was on the wrong end of that. Anything else on this one before we take a break and move to the next 2 games?
Good for Coach Tinkle. Makes me happy to see them thriving after being kind of left out to on the road to die.
Honestly, Beavers are alive and well. Maybe we'll get another surprise Elite 8 run out of it. No, I'm just kidding. That's not going to happen. But yes, very, very good for Coach Tinkle. And I think the question then we have to look at is how does Gonzaga respond to this? I mean, they're still 11th at KenPom. And next they get Santa Clara at home on Saturday. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Leaf, As ain't the only ranked team that lost on the road. Obviously, we've got our actual Thursday jinx that Andy and I gave, Memphis losing at Temple, and of course, Michigan. Woof, another overtime game, and this one ended with a little bleached blonde buzzer beater. We'll talk about those coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about this message, it's brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. So whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on that action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players, and if your picks hit, how about this? You could win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Leaf, we got the football national championship coming up on Monday night. Super excited for that. And folks, if you haven't seen Ohio State wide receiver Jeremiah Smith, he is a dude. And for some reason, Prize Picks has left you an opening because his thing is set at just 80.5 yards. Give me the more on that all day long. It's fun to predict and easy to play. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast and in as few as 15 minutes sometimes. So if you're ready to run your football game this season, download the app and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right. $50 just for playing. So don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Leaf, I'm going to let you, it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure here. Which game do you want to go to second?
Let's go to the Golden Gophers taking down the Wolverines.
Yes.
And you asked in the beginning, you said, what game is the one that has the largest impact? To me, it's this one.
Me
and
too.
It's not because it's the worst loss. It's because in conference play, Michigan has a chance because they've got talent. They've got a few big wins, and they have a lot of good teams that they face. They face in Ann Arbor. So I think they had a chance to win the Big Ten, but this slip up really hurts them because winning at home, and I know this isn't at home, but winning at home and then winning against the inferior teams in the conference is the recipe to win the conference. Right now, it's the only team who's really done that so far in the Big Ten has been Purdue. And then you have Illinois, who I think is the best team talent-wise, particularly when Kasper Yakichonis plays. I think they're the best team actually by a decent margin. And then you would look at the other teams that have a chance, and you could say, oh, it's Michigan. And Michigan just kind of blew a game in which they probably should have won.
Yes.
They had a lead at the end.
Yes.
And now I think that really hurts their chances. Michigan State's got a slim chance as well. I just want to say that. I just don't think they have the horses that some of the other teams in the conference do. But back to Michigan, they had a game in the barn. Formidable place to play, but Minnesota is really not very good. And so this doesn't even scale up on the same level as I'd say Oregon State. Minnesota and Oregon State are similar in terms of talent to me, but it's not as good of a team. And you need to win
in a much better conference.
Yeah, and you need to win this game for Michigan. Whereas Gonzaga, the reason it's not the most impactful in terms of resume building is they still probably win the WCC.
And Leaf, that I'm with you. I was going to select this as the most shocking of the three results to me because coming into this game, there were two undefeated teams in Big Ten play, the two Michigan schools. Now one of those is defeated. They have been surpassed. They've got a 1 in the loss column. It's crazy. But there was only one team with a 0 in the win column, and it was the Golden Gophers. And so the most unlikely of scenarios happens, but this is why we play the games, and it's not just on paper. And like for Michigan, man, this is a slap in the face. 3 Golden Gophers get 20 plus points in this game, including the 27 by Dawson Garcia, the last 3 of which obviously came on that buzzer beater to win the game just inside half court in overtime. I love that we got a bronze blonde. I don't know what color is his hair, man. Those highlights are weird, if we're being honest.
I'm not the person to ask. Maybe platinum though.
Yeah. It feels like an identity. It's like a midlife crisis when he's like 23. I think that's what we got going for Dawson Garcia. No, but great stuff. He's in his home state, playing in front of his home crowd, and gets this buzzer beater in overtime to get what is easily the biggest win of the season for Minnesota. And I love your point, Leaf, because the teams that win regular season conference championships are the teams that do what they're supposed to do against the bottom half of the league, both at home and on the road. And then the teams that win at home all their games and can steal a few here or there on the road against the upper half. Michigan laying an egg like this is unfortunate. Not laying an egg, because that makes it sound like they weren't in the game, right? They were obviously in the game, as you said, had a chance to win it. But man, when you've got a chance to be at the top of the Big Ten, get a game against, like when you look at your road games, you say, oh, good, we get a game at the worst team in the league. That should be an easy road win. And they just dropped that opportunity. Thankfully, it's a quad 2 loss. You're just trying to stick away from those quad 3 and quad 4 losses, right? And for none of these ranked teams were these quad 3 or quad 4 losses. They're all quad 1 or quad 2. But still, you got to wake up kicking yourself this morning if you are this Michigan Wolverines team, man. You hate to see it.
Absolutely. And one more thing about Michigan, and you could say, hey, they're afforded an extra spot because Illinois lost a home game, and a home game against not a very good team in USC.
That's fair.
That's without their best player. So that's right. This is all assuming that you stay healthy. So this was a fully well-functioning, expecting to win, not hampered Michigan team losing it and on the road. And that happens in college basketball. We saw the SEC this past weekend that even the top teams lose at home. Florida and Alabama lost at home. It happens. You get got against, because college basketball, there's more parity than there has been ever due to NIL and stuff we were referencing earlier in the previous segment. But I think it becomes more and more vital that the teams that win their conferences and the teams that make runs take care of business at home. And if you look at the top teams in the country, they've done so. Duke has 2 losses, both neutral sites, but they play the best team in the country at home. They get down 13-2, they still win. That's a sign of a really good team. Kansas enters Hilton. Hilton Magic takes effect, and Iowa State wins this week. So you look at those top teams, and if you want to put yourself into the conversation, I don't think Michigan's quite there, but they do believe they're quite there in terms of the upper echelon of the Big Ten. This is a game you must win.
Man, it's tough. And like when you look at it, always befuddles me in games like this. So, like, for example, Minnesota took a 5-2 lead. They led by 3 just under 2 minutes into the game. The only other time, or like that is their biggest lead, 3 points. And the other time that they got that lead was on the last play of the game as the buzzer sounded. Like that is like strike to the heart if you are the Michigan Wolverines. Well, Leaf, we've hit the Big Ten Thursday jinx. We've hit the West Coast Conference, and now we got to move to the AAC, where the actual Thursday jinx that Andy and I put on were Penny Hardaway's Memphis Tigers. We got to unpack that one at Temple coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings to come through. So whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. Oregon, number 13 in the nation, is hosting number 17 Purdue this weekend. Ducks favored by 2.5. That, by the way, is another game that our guy Andy Patton's going to be at this weekend. He's everywhere. Leave Tulane. So if you want to get in on that action or anything else, check it all out at FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Leaf, speaking of just going back really quick, while I was on the FanDuel site, I forgot to mention Michigan still has the second best odds at FanDuel. I don't know if it's been updated since last night, but it's like those kind of things. You're one of the 2 favorites by the betting markets to win this thing. You just can't drop games like that. All right, let's switch our attention now to the final of these 3 ranked teams to lose on the road on Thursday night. And this one, number 18 Memphis, going on the road and losing to Temple 88-81. Again, this is not a crazy damaging loss. It's a quad 2 loss. Temple's 107th today in the net. Of course, let's remember Memphis does have a wildly more damaging loss, that loss to Arkansas State at home, which is sitting in quad 3. Leaf, it feels like Penny Hardaway's team had done so much to work at making up for that Arkansas State loss. And to me, this gives it all back.
I actually disagree on this one. I think
Oh,
you're
good.
bound.
Bring it.
I think you're bound to lose a few.
Okay.
Like Memphis, to me, they feel like a team that you don't want to play because when they're on, they're difficult because they have a good backcourt that scores at a high volume. You have two centers that play different styles in Musa Cisse, and you have Dane Danger, who's like a dancing bear in the post. So you look at this team, and then they have Jourdain, they have Rogers, along with their star guards. I think it's about being able to be motivated. And that's not necessarily a sign of a great team because a great team's always hungry, but it's a team that to me knows they're the best team in the conference and they go play a formidable road site. And Temple has a tradition of success, an expectation of being good. It's been well ingrained in their soil in Philly. And I just think that you are going to lose a few road games out of, I wouldn't say indifference, but just not the same motivation that you had in Maui, where they showed themselves very nicely beating UConn, where they played as well as anyone did against Auburn, other than Iowa State. You look at their games; they win another road game throughout the season. I think they're a team that gets up for a game and they can overlook an opponent. And I don't know if they overlooked Temple per se, but I just don't think the motivation was as high, and that's where the loss occurs, as opposed to when they go and beat SEC teams like they have on neutral floors, like they win at home against Ole Miss, those type of things. So I'm less bothered by this because I think they were not going to go undefeated and run the gauntlet. If it starts becoming a recurring theme, then maybe we can get back to me. But for now, I'm not that bothered because I think this is easily the best team in the AAC, which I think is a down conference this year. Yeah. And therefore, they're just having one of those days.
And that's the thing. I mean, to your point, there are literally no other teams in the AAC in the top 100 at KenPom, although Temple, along with UAB, are perhaps the two closest. Temple's 106, or probably they've probably moved up. Let me look. Yeah, or no, they are 106 now. UAB is 104, but outside of that, most of the rest of the AAC is or FAU is 109. So I guess those three are all top 110. But outside of that, man, there ain't much there. And that is where the problem lies for me. Like, you're doing this the fourth game in to AAC play. And so I'm with you, Leaf. Like, you're going to get knocked off sometimes. Even Gonzaga in all their crazy runs through the West Coast Conference, that's happened to them. But they've left themselves not much margin. That's the thing about playing in this conference. And I think, if we're being frank, why they so desperately should be trying to get to the newly formed Pac-12, or why they should be trying to get to the Big 12, which I know they want to do, because it's like you are going to take a couple stray losses like this, but you got to minimize it. And so that's the thing now, where I think it is a massive hurdle for Penny's club to overcome. Because when you take this loss, you got 18 conference games. You can maybe lose one more, and it's got to be the right game, right? Like you can't lose to Charlotte on Sunday. That would be very damaging. You could lose maybe at you got UAB at home. You could lose to UAB on the road, maybe on March 2nd. It's just you can't take bad losses, and that's where they're going to have to continue to find a way to get motivated for these types of games so that they don't have other slip-ups of this nature.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how Penny's team reacts to this, because in their previous loss, like you mentioned at the outside of this, they lose to Central Arkansas, and you're like, man, how do you go from a number 12 team in the country to lose to Central Arkansas?
Arkansas State, by the way.
Arkansas State, sorry. Central Arkansas is who Yegor Demon beat the brakes off of. It's fresh in my mind still. Arkansas State, that's a better loss than Central Arkansas.
That's right.
They were not bad. Regardless, you lose to Arkansas State, and you lose that game, and now you have to redo all the work that you did to go from unranked to top 12. So they get themselves back in that vicinity, and they lose. So if it's a recurring theme, I am concerned. But I do wonder about Penny this year. I think there's more legitimacy to this team, way that they play, as opposed to the hot starts. They beat, I think it was Bahamas last year, where they won it. Or maybe that was 2 years ago. They won Bahamas and fell off the cliff and didn't make the tournament last year, I'm pretty sure. The year before that, they snuck in. They had Kendrick Davis, who was the best player in that league, and they get to the tournament. They lose to FAU, which turned out to be a good loss. That was FAU's Final Four team. But you look at that team, they should have won that game. They got some
crap calls at the end of that game.
They were very poor throughout the conference play. They were lackluster, and then they turned up for that. The year before that, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, that was Amoni Bates and Jalen Duren, and they played Gonzaga well. So they play well in big games, but throughout that season, they made it difficult because they were an 8 seed. For what reason? It wasn't because their talent wasn't there. It wasn't like that their schedule didn't allow them the chance to be better. It was that they were inconsistent and didn't have great chemistry. This team has better chemistry and has reacted better to adversity than the other one. So I do believe it's a better team than those previous ones, but it is something I'll have my eye on from afar because those are two, I wouldn't say inexplicable, but losses that you probably wouldn't assume for a team that I think when they play their best game is a top 15 team in the country.
And by the way, I have the benefit of I'm looking it up while you're talking. They made the B4A final last year, and
they lost to Nova.
To Nova, there you go. Which that speaking of winning battle for Atlantis and then falling off a cliff, woof. Leaf, there is no other realm in which I would put these three teams together and ask you this question, but this is what we're going to end on. Gonzaga, Memphis, Michigan, these three teams that lost on Thursday night, put them on a neutral court. Everybody plays a round robin. Who is the team that goes 2-0?
Whew. Wow, that's a fun one.
Let's go.
My initial reaction was, I think Gonzaga is the most well suited to win a neutral site game just because like they've done so many of those. They're so used to it. But honestly, I'm going to go with Memphis because Memphis has the best combination of athleticism and guard play.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Michigan's guards are that good. And despite how great Danny Wolf has been, they've lost close games. They also should have beaten Oklahoma, if you remember. And that was another game where they lost in a buzzer beater.
That's right.
But they don't have a closer because you don't want a 7-footer being your ball handler and closer at the end of a game.
Yep.
Gonzaga has lost every game that you've given an opportunity to lose against good teams so far. And Memphis has won against good teams. If they're up and have some motivation for it, I think they have the best ceiling of these teams. Gonzaga, that said, I think still can make a Sweet 16 Elite 8 run just because of how much I respect Mark Few and the adjustments he can make.
Yeah.
And it's not like they're lacking for talent. But on a neutral site, I'll go Memphis Tigers on this one.
Ooh, baby. I was going to go with Michigan. I decided on that before you answered, but I like your point about Michigan's guard play. I think there's some lack there, and I think PJ Haggerty might be able to expose that. And would PJ Haggerty be the best? I think it's either PJ or Danny Wolf is probably the best player on the floor in amongst those three teams.
I mean, Nembhard's quite good too, but he does it differently.
That's true. By the way, I forgot to mention when we were talking about the Michigan loss, Danny Wolf was 3 assists shy of a triple-double in that game. Of course, he had 6 turnovers as well, but we'll just move on past that. Leaf, great conversation. Folks, if you are not prepared for it, you need to get prepared for it now. It's going to be a crazy weekend of college basketball. Between Saturday and Sunday, 24 of the 25 AP ranked teams are in action. Utah State is the lone outlier on that. Saturday night, Leaf and Andy Patton, Locked On College Basketball Game Night Live. Make sure you check in with us. It's going to be a great conversation unpacking all of Saturday's crazy action. Got a whole host of ranked on ranked matchups, including Kentucky. Woo, that's going to be a fun ranked matchup on Saturday, Leaf. I cannot wait to see that happen as the Wildcats welcome the Crimson Tide to Rupp. That's going to be a fun one. Obviously, we talked about the Oregon and Purdue game. We've got, I think, 3 other ranked matchups on Saturday. So y'all are going to have a lot of great stuff to unpack that night. Cannot wait for it. Folks, thanks so much for joining us on this live action on Friday around lunchtime. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again on Saturday night. For now, though, if you haven't subscribed to the show, make sure you do that on YouTube so you don't miss the action when it happens on Saturday night. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd love to have you there as well. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes, and shouts to our guy, Mick Bruins. Until next time, peace.